And so I do not merely believe that there is a God. I have come to know him and place my trust in him, and I have substantial reasons for doing so. These were the words of John Lennox, mathematician and Christian apologist. In 2012, he appeared at the University of Oxford, where he logically defended the Christian faith and dismantled many of the irrational pillars of atheism. It was one of the most remarkable displays of reason and argument in favor of God within the framework of Christianity. What many fail to realize is that Richard Dawkins, one of the most prominent atheists and critics of Christianity, was seated in the audience at the time. Lennox declared with conviction, "I believe in God. I believe in the transcendent God who created the heavens and the earth. I believe in a God who sustains the heavens and the earth in existence. And I believe this on the basis of rational evidence, much like the beliefs held by the founders of this house, who gave this university its motto, Dominus Illuminatio Mea, the Lord is my light." They saw no contradiction between faith in God and the highest levels of rational inquiry. With reverence and boldness, he referenced his alma mater. If I may be permitted to mention my alma mater, Cambridge, in this hallowed hall, I would remind you that above the entrance to the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge are written the words, "Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them." Reflecting on the rise of science during the 16th and 17th centuries, Alfred North Whitehead and others observed that men became scientific because they expected to find laws in nature, and they expected laws because they believed in a lawgiver. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I am not ashamed to be a scientist and a Christian, because undoubtedly Christianity gave me my subject. Lennox then challenges the modern false dichotomy. What astonishes me is that serious thinkers still today demand we choose between God and science. That is like asking people to choose between Henry Ford and mechanical engineering as an explanation for the motor car. When Newton discovered his law of gravity, he did not say, "I have a law, therefore I no longer need God." Quite the opposite. He wrote the Principia Mathematica, arguably the greatest scientific work ever composed, because he saw God not as a rival explanation to science, but as the ultimate foundation of all reality. God does not compete. Divine agency is not in conflict with mechanism or law. And then he asks the question that reverberates at the heart of philosophy and cosmology: why is there something rather than nothing? Alan Sandage, the eminent cosmologist who embraced Christianity at the age of 50, stated that God is the answer to that question. Yet we live in a culture so eager to assert that the universe created itself out of nothing, which seems to me an immediate oxymoron. Lennox quips with precision, "If I say that X created Y, I am presupposing the existence of X to explain the existence of Y. If I say X created X, I am presupposing X to explain its own existence, which merely illustrates that nonsense remains nonsense, even when proclaimed by powerful scientists." This line of reasoning leads him to quote G.K. Chesterton, "It is absurd to complain that it is unimaginable for an unimaginable God to have made everything out of nothing, and then pretend it is more imaginable that nothing turned itself into everything." Lennox concludes with an elevated vision of creation. "The heavens declare the glory of God," says the ancient psalm. And we catch a glimpse of that as we examine the fine-tuned balance of the universe's fundamental forces. This tuning is so astonishing to scientists that it calls out for explanation. He then quotes Arno Penzias, Nobel Prize winner who discovered the cosmic microwave background radiation, one of the strongest evidences for the Big Bang. Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe created out of nothing, with a delicately balanced configuration necessary to provide precisely the right conditions for life, a universe with an underlying design. One may call it supernatural, but I wish to address what I regard as one of the central arguments for theism. I assume this institution holds reason in high esteem. That is, after all, why we are gathered here. And as a scientist, I am convinced that the universe is intelligible through reason, a fact that has deeply fascinated some of the greatest minds in science, precisely because it cries out for explanation. Einstein remarked that the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible, and Wigner referred to the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. How is it that mathematics, constructed in the privacy of our minds, can generate equations that seem to map perfectly onto the fabric of the cosmos? How, indeed, is that even possible? The irony of the atheistic stance becomes rather apparent. Many of my atheist colleagues tell me that the evolutionary process, which eventually yielded our human cognitive capacities, including reason, was not primarily aimed at truth, but at survival. And we are all aware, ladies and gentlemen, of what often happens, and still happens, to the truth when individuals, corporations, or nations feel threatened and are struggling to survive. The distinguished philosopher Alvin Plantinga has argued that if atheists are right in asserting that we are the byproducts of unguided, non-rational natural processes, then they have given us solid grounds to distrust the reliability of our cognitive faculties. Consequently, we are compelled to doubt the truth of any belief these faculties produce, including atheism itself, its biological framework, and its trust in naturalism. These notions appear to be at odds with one another, engaged in a conflict that has little to do with God. And yet, my atheist friends persist in claiming that it is rational to believe that the evolution of human reasoning was unguided and unconcerned with discovering truth, while simultaneously dismissing as irrational my belief that reason was divinely designed to help us perceive and embrace truth. This peculiar logic stands in contrast with biblical theism, which asserts that ultimate reality is both intelligent and personal. The reason science functions at all, and this, incidentally, was the primary motivator for many of science's early pioneers, is because both the external world and the human mind that investigates it are, at root, creations of the same divine intelligence. We are told that human beings were fashioned in the image of God, which makes scientific inquiry not only possible but meaningful. That makes infinitely more sense to me as a scientist than the atheist alternative. Now, allow me to touch briefly upon ethics. Ethical conduct, like rational thought, obviously does not necessitate religious belief. This is in harmony with the idea that humans were created in God's image as moral and rational agents. However, just as I suggest that rationality is inexplicable without God, I dare to propose that morality is equally so. In the same way that modern science sprang from Judeo-Christian foundations, the concept of human equality also finds its roots there. Let us consider the words of atheist Jürgen Habermas, arguably one of Germany's foremost intellectuals, who stated, "Universalist egalitarianism, from which stem the ideas of freedom, collective life and solidarity, individual morality, of conscience, human rights and democracy, is the direct legacy of the Jewish ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. To this day, there is no alternative to it. Everything else is mere postmodern chatter." It seems to me that he has grasped something profoundly important: the worth of a human being, upon which such egalitarianism is founded, is not derived from what a person does, but from what they are, someone made in the image of God. I will never forget a conversation I had during one of my many visits to Russia with a colleague from the Academy of Sciences. He said, "You know, John, we thought we could eliminate God and still retain human value. We discovered we couldn't, and we murdered millions in the process." And Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, "If you ask me why 60 million of my fellow countrymen were slaughtered, I will tell you, because we forgot God." Science, of course, is a marvel, but it is not without limits. Even a Nobel laureate analyzing a cake cannot determine why it was made. But Aunt Matilda, who baked it, can. She could reveal it to you, but if she chooses not to, you will never know. And that brings me to my next line of evidence. The universe is no different. We may dissect it brilliantly. Yet ultimately, if it has a creator, and I believe it does, only he can tell us its purpose, and he has done so through the powerful narrative of the Bible, especially in its diagnosis of the human condition. A condition not merely of societal breakdown, but a vertical collapse of trust between humanity and its creator. The unique solution to this condition lies not only in ethical improvement, though that matters greatly, but in something far deeper: the restoration of a broken relationship with God through the salvation he offers via Jesus Christ, a radical relationship that empowers us to live ethically from within by God's own strength. And here we come to what, for me, is one of the clearest pieces of evidence, not only of God's existence, but of his character. It was Jesus Christ, who not only taught the Golden Rule, but embodied it. He fed the hungry, healed the sick and suffering, welcomed the outcasts of society, restored dignity to the marginalized and shamed, and brought forgiveness and peace to millions across the globe. He's certainly able to do so because, although he was a man, he was never merely a man. He was God made flesh. The principal evidence for this astonishing claim is, of course, his story, the resurrection from the dead, which propelled Christianity into the world. This is, without doubt, ladies and gentlemen, a matter of utmost importance. If Jesus truly rose from the dead, then death is not the conclusion, and atheism is mistaken. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, then Christianity is without foundation. I recall, as a student in Cambridge, listening to the brilliant Sir Norman Anderson, a legal scholar, scrutinize the evidence for the resurrection from a legal standpoint. As an exceptional lawyer, he maintained that the empty tomb of Jesus remains a solid cornerstone against which all rationalist theories about the resurrection ultimately shatter. Now, finally, when I read the Bible, I find not only intellectual fulfillment, though there is plenty, but I hear the voice of God addressing me. You see, this is deeply personal. But ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked this evening about belief in God, and I want to stress emphatically that God is not an abstract idea. He is a living being. If the origin of the human person lies in a personal God, then the most thrilling possibility is precisely this: we can know him. Therefore, I do not merely believe that God exists. I have come to know him and place my confidence in him. And I have profound reasons for this, because of Christ, who died and rose again for me. That truth has given rise in me to an overwhelming sense of absolute forgiveness, belonging, and serenity, which has enabled me to confront the darker corners of my own being and, with God's help, begin to change. But it has also equipped me to face another reality, the most difficult challenge I encounter as a Christian: the issue of evil and suffering. My niece had a tumor at the age of 22, which took her life. What do I say to my sister? This is perhaps the most painful problem we must wrestle with, but it seems to me that atheism offers no solution, because by definition, atheism asserts that human death is the final curtain, and so there is no ultimate hope. Yet, ladies and gentlemen, we could sit here until midnight and beyond, debating, as has been done in this university for centuries, what a good God should, could, or would not have done. And we would make little progress. So it strikes me that we need to pose a different question. Life gives us a double picture. We see beauty, we see agony, affliction, and brokenness. We see delight. How do we reconcile it all? There is no easy answer. But there is a glimpse, a window, into one. And it is this: if it is true that Jesus is, as I firmly believe, the Son of God, then we can ask the following: what is God doing on the cross? And the answer is, at the very least, God did not remain detached from human suffering. He stepped into it. And the other side of this truth is this: because Jesus rose from the dead, he will be the ultimate judge. And here lies a striking irony. Atheism, by its very nature, holds no enduring hope of justice. The overwhelming majority of people throughout history died without ever receiving justice, and many more will. And if death is the end, then obviously there is no possibility of final justice. But the promise of the New Testament, secured by Jesus' resurrection, is that he will one day be the judge of all. Ladies and gentlemen, these are some of the reasons why I am convinced that God is real and worthy of our trust. Thank you. What I treasure about Christianity is that it is not grounded solely in faith, that is, in trusting the promises of God, but also in the reason God has revealed to us through his creation and through the person of Jesus Christ.